meeting of September 17th, 2025. I will call the meeting to order at 7:01 p.m. For those joining us in person, please note that due to our hybrid environment, audio and video presentations can no longer be shared from the lectern. Requests to show an audio or video presentation during a meeting should be directed to epc@mountainview.gov by 4:30 p.m. on the meeting date. Additionally, due to our hybrid environment, we will no longer have speakers lined up to speak on an item. Anyone wishing to address the EPC in person must complete a yellow speaker card. Please indicate the name you would like to be called by when it is your turn to speak and the item number on which you wish to speak. Please complete one yellow speaker card for each item on which you wish to speak. It is small text, you're right. On which you wish to speak and turn them into the EPC clerk as soon as possible, but no later than the call for public comment on the item you are speaking on. Instructions for addressing the commission virtually may be found on the posted agenda. Now I will ask the EPC clerk to proceed with roll call.
Yes, Commissioner Dempsey. Commissioner Donahue.
Here.
Commissioner Yin.
Here.
Commissioner Cranston.
Here.
Commissioner Pham.
Here.
Vice Chair Nunez.
Here.
And Chair Gutierrez. All commissioners are present except for Commissioner Dempsey and Chair Gutierrez.
All right. I'm going to presume that Chair Pham would like to not be introduced as new for a third time. So I will proceed with the approval of the minutes, for which there is none. And so we will speed this along to the oral communications, item number 4. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the EPC on any matter not on the agenda. Speakers are allowed to speak on any topic for up to 3 minutes during this section. State law prohibits the commission from acting on non-agenda items. If anyone in attendance would like to provide comments on non-agenda items, please fill out a yellow speaker card and provide it to the EPC clerk. If anyone on Zoom would like to provide comment on non-agenda items, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Phone users can mute and unmute themselves with *6. Mr. Clerk, do we have any speakers offering yellow cards or on the Zoom attendee list with raised hands?
There's no one present in person. No one online either.
All right. Seeing none, I think we can close item 4, oral communications, and proceed to item 5.1, and this being for 749 West El Camino Real, a mixed-use residential item. I would like to note that this item will be continued to October 15th, 2025. It will not be heard at today's meeting. There will be no formal staff presentation, but since the project was noticed as a public hearing, EPC will still take public comments on this item. Now we'll move to public comment. If anyone in attendance would like to provide comments on this item, please fill out a yellow speaker card and provide it to the EPC clerk. If anyone on Zoom would like to provide a comment on this item, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Phone users can mute and unmute themselves with *6. Mr. Clerk, do we have any yellow cards submitted or anyone on the Zoom attendee list with a raised hand?
There's no one present in the room, but we have one person on Zoom, Robert Cox.
Okay. We'll take that comment now.
Okay, give me 1 second.
Mr. Cox?
Hey, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Vice Chair Nunez and members of the Environmental Planning Commission, thank you for the opportunity to talk on the redevelopment of the Chase Bank site. Tonight, I'm speaking on my own behalf, but I do want to thank Mr. Dybel, Ms. Thibodeau, and other members of the Gray Star team for reaching out to the Mountain View Historical Association and Livable Mountain View to share their plans to preserve key pieces of artwork from this historic site and integrate it into their new development. I also appreciate their adopting the theme of Richardsonian arches in the architecture for the apartments that they will develop. This design element will lend a sense of historic continuity to the site. I would also like to raise one concern about the project. I understand that there is no dedicated parking for Amazon and Amazon-like delivery vehicles on the site. The project is 299 new apartments. It is likely there will be multiple package deliveries per day. When bike lanes were recently installed in El Camino, street parking was removed in front of the Prometheus Montrose complex. 3 times in the last month, my driving was blocked for 5 to 10 minutes by Amazon delivery vehicles parked in the traffic lanes. Such Amazon vehicles should have had dedicated parking within the complex so they do not block other drivers and create a safety hazard on the road. Let's plan ahead for this development before any problems occur at this new site. Thank you for listening to my views.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. Mr. Clerk, do we have any other speakers in the queue?
There's no one else in the queue.
Okay. Having closed public comment on this item, we need a motion to continue this item to October 15th, 2025. Do we have a motion? Okay, looks like we have a motion from Commissioner Yin and a second from Commissioner Pham. Shall we call the vote?
The motion passes with 5 yeas and 2 absent.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Okay, excellent. 5.1 is now closed. We will proceed with item 5.2, which is the Tenant Relocation Assistance Ordinance Amendments Housing Element Program 3.2. We'll first have a staff presentation, followed by questions from the EPC and public comment. At the conclusion of public comment, the Commission will deliberate and take action. Let's begin with a staff presentation from Rent Stabilization Division Manager Anki Van Dersen and the city's housing director, Mr. Wayne Chen.
Thank you, Vice Chair Nunez, and good evening, Environmental Planning Commission, not committee. I'll be doing the presentation tonight. I'm Wayne Chen, the Housing Director. Anki Van Dersen, Rent Stabilization Manager, will be joining via Zoom, along with Andrea Kennedy, Senior Management Analyst with the Rent Stabilization Division. Legal Counsel to the Rental Housing Commission, Nazanin Salehi, and they'll be available to help assist with questions if needed. As mentioned, this item is regarding proposed amendments to the tenant relocation assistance ordinance. This item is one of the required elements under our housing element program 3.2. I'll just start with the recommendation first, which is to recommend that the City Council repeal the existing tenant relocation assistance ordinance, which is in Chapter 36, amending Chapter 46, and adding the tenant relocation assistance there, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. So the background on Program 3.2 for the housing element is that it contains the city's comprehensive tenant displacement response strategy. That strategy started as a council work plan priority back in 2019. There are various elements. Program 3.2 has multiple elements, and reviewing the TREO is one of them, and you'll see it verbatim here on the screen, what the requirement was, which was to evaluate the efficacy of the TREO in meeting anti-displacement goals. In terms of the process, we have been doing stakeholder outreach throughout the process ever since 2019. But then we also hold specific stakeholder meetings for individual pieces of Program 3.2. And for this particular piece of TREO, we had stakeholder outreach meetings in the summer last year, which included meetings with tenants, developers, and property owners as well. We brought this item to the Rental Housing Committee as a study session last November. The division and the Rental Housing Committee oversees tenant protection programs, and the Community Stabilization Fair Rent Act, the CSFRA, also overlaps and interacts with the TREO. So the Rental Housing Committee function as the advisory body to the City Council in this instance. The Rental Housing Committee unanimously supported the framework that council staff provided, and City Council held a study session last December and also unanimously supported the recommendations, which again we'll talk about in a moment. Tonight we're here in front of you because EPC oversees or is part of the process to amend Chapter 36, and so that's why we're here tonight. We just also wanted to provide a little bit of state law because the TREO includes various state law requirements related to SB 330, which is the Housing Crisis Act, the Ellis Act, and also other health and safety code requirements. Many of these requirements, or several of these requirements, include various noticing requirements. That's why you'll see them reflected in the charts and is part of the recommended amendments. So just as a summary of what was discussed last year with the RHC and the council, there were 6 areas that staff brought forward as ways to increase the efficacy of the TREO. With the data that we presented last year, there were 43% of the tenants who were part of this displacement projects that were able to relocate within Mountain View. 41% of the displaced tenants were able to relocate outside of Mountain View, but within the Bay Area. And there were other folks who had to leave the state or relocated to other parts of the state. And so that was part of the notion of could the 43% be increased to be able to allow tenants to stay in Mountain View. There were 6 items, and just briefly in terms of the challenges, I'll start with that and go to the recommendations, is that the current TREO has a move-out date that is earlier, that is allowed to be earlier than what SB 330 allows. We'll talk about that in the chart in a moment. And that could cause tenants to move out sooner than they need to. So the recommendation was to add the later SB 330 move-out date to the TREO and modify that. The second piece is another notice or a notice. Under our current TREO, there is a notice of intent requirement, which requires an applicant, a developer, to send information about the project to tenants within 30 days of filing a development application. That could also have an unintended consequence of a tenant looking at the information, thinking, oh, I have to leave, even though that's not the case. And so the second recommendation is just to have the NOI be at a later date, maybe more consistent with some other cities that have a later date requirement. The third item is that in our current program, there are not provisions to deal with temporary displacement. For example, if a developer or landlord wants to make renovations, depending on the situation, they may be subject to permanent relocation costs, even though it's just a temporary situation. And so the recommendation was to add a new section specifically talking about a temporary situation and what the options would be for those. The fourth item was that under our current TREO, there is an exemption that says if a city issues an enforcement order, perhaps in a situation where it comes to the city's attention that there are units that are not permitted or that they are not fit for habitation, that the city can come in, tag it, which would require tenants to move. In this situation, relocation benefits are actually not required, and the recommendation was to remove this exemption so that the benefits would be applied in those situations. The fifth one was the so SB 330 has a provision that says in a demolition redevelopment project, protected units need to be replaced, and they need to be replaced at certain levels. SB 330 also has a first right of refusal for qualifying tenants, low-income tenants, to move back to the site in a new unit. And our trail doesn't have that. And so the recommendation was to add that, and that would codify the state requirement. Finally, there was discussion about whether there should be an evaluation of increased benefits to increase that 43%, essentially, whether it's greater benefits or some other criteria. So we'll talk about that in a moment. And so council supported all of these recommendations and provided some additional framing for number 6, additional benefits. So by way of this chart, Amendment 1 seeks to illustrate how SB 330 adding the vacate date can help improve the situation. And this is just an illustrative example. Of course, an actual development may have different timing, or the developer might choose to do slightly different things. But the illustrative example is in the left column. The current trail process is in the middle column, and the proposed amendments are in the right third column. And what you'll see there in the middle column, there is a vacate date, which essentially says the vacate date can be placed after a project is approved. So in this illustrative example, the vacate date, the developer sets it right after the project approval, which is in 4A. By adding the vacate date, which is at least 6 months before the construction date, so tying the vacate date to the construction date rather than the project approval date, shifts 4A down to 4B and extends the time frame by which a tenant can stay. Amendment number 2 is putting that later notice of intent. As mentioned, the current requirement is submittal of a 30-day a notice of intent 30 days after the applicant files a development permit, and the recommendation is to move it to 1 year prior to the vacate date, which is concurrent with some other notices. We're also recommending that instead of this early notice of intent that would be submitted by the developer to the tenants, the city would come in with a city letterhead giving information to the tenants. It may feel like the same thing, but the idea is that if it comes from the city, it may be possible to better communicate to the tenants that they don't have to leave. And the thinking is that information might still spread about a development application, and folks might get worried, and so it would be helpful for information to come from the city. So the way this shows up is that the informational notice in 1B essentially replaces the developer notice in 1A. And then the 1A, the notice of intent by the developer, is shifted down to 2B in red. And you can see how that comes later on in the process. That 1 year termination notice is a state requirement, so that is why it's in here as 1 year prior to the vacate date. And this essentially is sort of a summary of the various notices that would be part of these TREO amendments. Amendment 3 is to add a temporary displacement section, which is what is proposed. It's in your attachment or exhibit number 1. Staff is recommending that temporary displacement be 90 days or less. In reviewing potential lengths of time for renovations, the thought is that 90 days provides sufficient time for renovations. It would allow the landlord to start a project and complete it. Longer than 90 days may start to drag out a bit and start to feel more permanent. This section was modeled off of a actual temporary displacement situation that you may have heard of, the 660 Mariposa project, which was very successfully renovated and converted from a CSFRA project into a permanent deed-restricted housing project. And in that one, I believe the renovations took between 2 to 3 months. And in that version of that project, there were 3 relocation options provided to tenants. Council liked to have that many of options, so those options have been included here as amendments. It also includes moving and or storage costs, which the 660 Mariposa provided. and also a first right of return for the original tenants to go back to the same unit once the renovations are complete. And then there's a situation here where we're recommending that if it exceeds 90 days, tenants can have some option to either continue in their current situation or opt to leave and receive the permanent relocation. Again, this was the effort to kind of balance giving enough time for the landlord to do the renovations, but maybe mitigating some situations where it gets dragged out. Amendment 4 is the exemption for city enforcement actions, as discussed a little bit earlier, and the amendment is simply just removing that exemption. However, staff is recommending having an exemption for if there is a situation where city red tagging needs to occur because the unit has been damaged or it's not habitable, but that it was not caused by the landlord's doing or efforts. Amendment number 5 is adding the SB 330 right of first refusal. So essentially, this is what we were talking about before in a redevelopment project. When a new project replaces formerly protected units, this provision essentially codifies the state requirement and gives displaced tenants the first right to go back into the unit before it's offered on the market. Staff is recommending that this remain consistent with SB 330 in terms of first right of refusal be offered to low-income tenants and not for tenants who are above that threshold. This section also requires landlord to provide information so that the city can actually establish whether they're following SB 330 requirements. And we're recommending that these pieces of information be part of a development application so that the city can actually start evaluating the information at the beginning. Oftentimes we do find information where we're not getting it at the beginning, and it really does come in on the back end, and it makes it very difficult for staff to be able to evaluate compliance with city programs. And so this requirement, the recommendation is also that these pieces of information need to be provided and need to be followed, or otherwise the project could be at risk of voiding their entitlements or their permits. Regarding amendment number 6 for increased benefits, council recommended last year to increase benefits for the low income group up to 80% AMI, those households. And staff did do due diligence across the comparison jurisdictions. How do other cities maybe treat this population and maybe provide some enhanced benefits for those most in need? And that was the intention for council. The 80% low income group are the ones who are most in need. Staff is recommending that the low-income household be included as a part of the current definition of those who qualify for additional payments under the special circumstance household definition. So currently, the definition includes a household with seniors or with school-aged children, and the recommendation is to expand that definition and add low-income households. And this is something that we see in other jurisdictions as well. Council also recommended a provision for moving costs for all tenants, regardless of income, unlike the previous one, which was limited to the low-income group, under the notion that although there are higher income folks, everyone is impacted to some extent, and so that having at least moving costs for everyone would be reasonable. Again, staff did a lot of due diligence, looking at other cities, talking with the city's own third-party relocation consultant who advises other cities and implements tenant relocation in other jurisdictions. And the recommendation is to have moving costs within 50 miles of their address currently. The thinking is that this provides a reasonable balance between being able to keep folks within the Bay Area, but it doesn't leave it open-ended and folks are maybe relocating to some distant place with a much higher cost. And landlords have options here where they can either provide it directly or they can reimburse costs that tenants bear up front. And so finally, this was a recommendation that came after the council and RHC meetings last year, is to recommend that the trail be shifted from Chapter 36 to Chapter 46. There are a few reasons for this. One is that just reviewing the projects and reviewing the ordinances, that this is really not related to zoning. and Chapter 36 is zoning. TRAIL is also referenced in the CSFRA, as mentioned, and that is really overseen by the Rental Housing Committee. And then finally, there is a council strategic priority to review and perform code cleanups. And the intention is Chapter 46 would get expanded. Currently, it's the Mobile Home Rent Stabilization Ordinance. Should this move to Chapter 46, it would start to bring that over. We are envisioning a couple of other ordinances forthcoming that would get consolidated under this Chapter 46 location. So that's an additional staff recommendation to make that move. So the next steps is we currently have a public hearing scheduled for council next month on the 28th of October. That would constitute the first reading of the TRAIL amendments. And given the holidays, we're looking at the second reading, the first meeting in December. So with that, that concludes the presentation, and happy to answer any questions you may have.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chen. We will proceed to public comment for this item. If anyone in attendance would like to provide comments on this item, please fill out a yellow speaker card and provide it to the EPC clerk. If anyone on Zoom would like to provide a comment on this item, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Phone users can mute and unmute themselves with *6.
Sorry to interrupt, but maybe we should check if we have any EPC questions first.
Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds good. Cool. All right. Any questions from the commissioners? Mr. Donahue.
Yeah, I have a couple questions. One is, what's the history? Why is this in Chapter 36 to start with?
Yes, thank you for the question. The ordinance was created in 2010, so before our time. I think we've tried to dig into the history of it, and that's just where it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, because as you said, it's not really zoning specific, so yeah, I was just curious. Another question is, one of the cutoffs is 120% AMI plus 5,000, and I just wonder where the 5,000 came from, if that's indexed to inflation or anything like that, or if it's going to be 5,000 indefinitely.
Yeah, so one of the last times the trail was amended was in 2020, and it was in 2020 where council wanted to add this 5,000 boost on top of the 120. What they'd been hearing and what staff had been hearing was that in redevelopment projects, there would be households that just exceeded that 120% AMI limit, and council just wanted to provide some higher limit to increase the eligibility of those who could receive the benefits. The 5,000 is not indexed, but the 120% AMI does fluctuate with the HCD income limit, so that's how that would go up in tandem.
Okay. Okay. And actually, those are all my questions. Thanks.
Commissioner Pham.
I had a few questions. First question was section 46.2-310 allows landlords to propose alternative mitigation strategies. These, as per the staff report, say that they are submitted to the housing director and then subject to city council approval. Can you speak more about that process, and in general, how will those mitigation strategies be evaluated?
Yes, thank you for the question. To staff's knowledge, since the beginning of TRAIL, there's been one alternative mitigation request, and it's actually the 660 Mariposa project. And what we've done with that is that we've actually now incorporated that framework into the new temporary displacement section. The current TRAIL does have the alternative mitigation section, and staff is just proposing to keep that. We don't have a lot of examples to go off of, but one principle that we would envision using to evaluate is whether the alternative mitigation provides an equivalent value as compared to the standard requirements. Again, in reality, there may not really be many of these requests. So I think part of this is to continue to monitor whether there are such requests. What's in the proposed amendments is, I think, really capturing most of the situations that we are likely to see. So I think we'll just kind of monitor and see whether alternate mitigations is something that becomes used, or maybe the standard provisions under the modified trail would really take care of things.
Okay, thanks. I also had a more general question, since I'm interested in tracking outcomes, and I know you guys brought up some great statistics, which is great. But in general, can you describe how staff plan to monitor the effectiveness of the program, like going forth, and how that data is collected?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's that question in part informed the amendment under the SB 330, first right of refusal to return to a unit, and the development application submittal requirement for the unit inventory, tenants and tenant incomes, and whether a unit was vacant or not. Those pieces of information are actually really critical and necessary to determine SB 330 compliance and what the replacement requirements are. And so those provisions would be a way for us to get information from the applicant so we can evaluate it. So that's one way we can get the baseline information. The second piece is that we would continue to work with the developer and our relocation consultant to track the information. Who's receiving the notices, who's opting to take the benefits, et cetera. And that's been the way that we've been tracking the information to date, and we would continue to track it that way as well.
Okay, great. I had a question about the 50 miles for capping moving transportation costs. What do other jurisdictions do?
Yeah, 50 miles is a pretty common standard that what we were able to find in the comparison jurisdictions, and then also in discussion with our relocation consultant who advises many other cities. So that was the recommendation because it seemed to be the most prevalent standard where a jurisdiction has a moving cost provision.
My last question is more of just a clarification question. I noticed in the staff report it was mentioned about the demolition permit date of issuance, and I wasn't sure how that connected with all the notices.
Right, yes. Maybe it would be helpful for me to just kind of go back to that chart. So with 4B now part of the proposed TRAO amendments, which is the TRAO vacate date, but which is based off of the SB 330 provision, a developer would essentially work backwards. So I would actually first start with the first column, the green C, which is the construction begins. And a developer, in putting together their project schedule, would estimate when that would start and do some estimating of when the project would be entitled, submit for a building permit application, and when the demolition permit would be issued, and then essentially working backwards from C. So C establishes the estimated construction begin date. We're proposing the demolition permit to be the sort of the clear criteria for that. And then 4B is 6 months before the estimated construction date. And so as you establish C and 4B, the other notices really just kind of fall into place. So for example, 2B is just based off of 4B, but 4B is based off of C. So all of this would be part of information we would ask the developer to submit, and then we would track against those dates. So it is both something that should be in the application and information that the developer provides, and it's also based on an actual demo permit issuance date, as in terms of what staff is recommending as a clear standard.
Okay. My last question is related to the city informational notice.
Mm-hmm.
What information would be in it? Would the city be informing tenants of this program? And then also, what kind of outreach has been done with small to medium-sized landlords as well?
Sure. Maybe working backwards, the outreach was done really just as part of the stakeholder outreach process that we described at the beginning of the presentation. What we would envision for city informational notice is a simple, easy to read document potentially translated into multiple languages, and it would include some basic information. You know, there's been a development application, for this apartment. Do not move. You will get information from the developer at the appropriate time for when you would need to move, and the dates would be specified then. So hang tight. And then we'll give some information about the Treo program, where to find the information, and we would envision providing at least some key criteria, such as there will be these notices that will come to you. These notices will be determined based on these timelines, and it gives them tenants a sense of the overall trajectory of a project and the timeframes for the project. So that's what we would envision. We would start producing it if and when council approves staff's recommendation.
Got it. Thank you.
Commissioner Yin.
Thanks. Actually, like Commissioner Pham, I had a few questions, and she covered a couple of them. But I had additional ones, and it was regarding, where's the first one? When you had your stakeholder meeting, did you find that most of the reasons people would leave and not come back was due to noticing issues? Were there enough tenants there to be able to give you that feedback?
Yeah, I'm going to take a first cut and draw my memory, but I would also like to see if Anki or Andrea have some additional color to add. The tenant stakeholder meetings were very well attended, and based on some of that input, there was identification of early notices being a reason that folks might move out sooner than they needed to. We haven't had a situation where a project has made it through an SB 330 construction, so there isn't a return back to a new unit yet. But we have seen a couple of examples where a project were subject to both Treo and SB 330 at the time, and folks did leave a lot sooner than they needed to. But the project actually just kept getting extended by quite a long time. And so that made the SB 330 vacate date particularly important, and that came up in the tenant stakeholder meetings. Let me pause there to see if that responded, or if you'd like some additional color.
I think that's generally good. A follow-up question would be, has it been difficult to get the contact info for people who move? If they're moving early, they make plans, they go, is it easy for staff to get that info, or for the developer?
Yes, so this is something that is coordinated with the relocation consultant and with the developer. I know that there's a list that is kept, and if folks are moving, that there is contact information, addresses, potentially phone numbers or emails, but some might not provide that information, or some might subsequently move and may not update the city about that. So I think there's a good percentage of folks that remain connected, but there's going to be situations where folks are either not providing the information or not updating the city with the information. I'm going to pause there to see if Anki Vanderson or Andrea Kennedy have any additional information to provide.
Hello, committee. This is Anki Vanderson, Rent Stabilization Manager. So under the current Treo, only tenants that consider themselves eligible will fill in the form that has been sent to all the tenants of a specific property that is going to be redeveloped. And we usually only get the information back from the tenants that think that they're eligible or they are eligible. So most tenants under the 120% AMI plus $5,000 AMI. So for those people, we usually have all the information. For people that disqualify themselves without sending in a form, we don't have that information. So we hope with the new Treo that we capture more tenants because in general, all tenants would be covered for moving costs. So we hope that all tenants will fill out their forms so we get a better return information from all the tenants.
Okay, thank you. So it hasn't been a huge issue of being able to contact people that are qualified to be able to receive benefits.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, and thank you, Anki. Yeah, we believe that most of the folks who don't initially register and provide information have done a self-selection process. Mm-hmm. And if your question is about those who have selected in to try to get the benefits, and whether that has been a challenge. So I think that we have good information, and then it's really maybe identifying some opportunities for folks who might change their contact information, getting those updates. But those who qualify typically do register, and we have their information. As Anki mentioned, this process may motivate all tenants to register because all tenants would at least get something, i.e. moving costs.
Okay, thank you. And regarding the scheduling, I know it's very complicated. It took me a minute to understand everything. However, the challenge is that the final date is sort of a little bit of a moving target. So working backwards from a moving target, it can be hard, but you're asking the developer to name a target, which is their date of construction. But your notice has to be when the project's approved. I guess that's when it goes out. The notice of intent goes out during project approval. So is there a minimum amount of time then that's between project approval and construction date? So if it's a small project and it goes pretty fast, then you don't have the full amount of time. Does that mean that developers have to wait the full time, even though they can go faster? I mean, how did you, I guess, work that out with timing in terms of various projects having various timelines?
Yes, this is just an illustrative example. So B in the left column and 2B in the right column look like they're kind of around the same time, but projects may vary. I think the dates to really pin down are the estimated construction beginning start date, C, and then 4B, the 6 months prior to the construction date, mm-hmm. And then 2B. 2B is a state requirement. It needs to be at least 1 year in advance of 4B. And so those are the things that are just not, there's no flexibility around. So the developer just needs to really track 2B and 4B and sync it up with C. Where the project gets approved just kind of falls somewhere in the process, but 2B is a requirement, and 4B is a recommended TREO timeframe. To try to address the fact that projects might change, in the very small U, which is the update notice, so we try to mm-hmm. fit it into this chart, is the notion that projects may change, but by the time you get to U, which is between 2B and 3B, there's much greater clarity, and so if the date has indeed changed and tenants don't have to move out because construction has been delayed, that's the intention of U, of the update notice. That has been based on at least one project that had this happen multiple times, so this is getting built in as part of the recommendations.
Okay. So I'm just trying to put myself in the place of a tenant, and I would imagine then the notice that they're getting might also include the full schedule of when they get noticed and the fact that this can change, and on this day you'll be getting an update. Yes. As to whether it changes.
Yes. So if a tenant wanted to just continue to stay for as long as they can, and some tenants, even after receiving this information, would just say, well, I would just rather relocate now, and that's up to them. But those who really want to stay through the full period would at least have the visibility of what they can expect through the process, which has some uncertainty to it. But these recommendations hopefully will minimize that uncertainty. In the project that I'm thinking of that had multiple dates getting shifted out, there were indeed tenants that just continue to stay, and there were tenants that did move. So you will have a mix of both. For the tenants who stay, they would benefit from this information being described to them.
Okay, and it's usually through a website or a phone number they can call? Is there something where they constantly can, at any day, can just refer to a schedule to see if it's been changed? Or is it just that one date it's going to change, that the update date, where they say, okay, it's been postponed 2 months or 3 months, and then that's the last update they get until the notice of termination?
What has occurred in practice with a project is a notice would be sent to the tenants. Here's the new date, and you have an additional 3 months. And then before the additional 3 months concludes, we would be coordinating with the developer to ask if it's happening or if it's going to be another extension. And so prior to the 3 months concluding, another notice gets sent out, says you have another 3 months. So that's what has occurred in practice. I think what we could do is see if there's any other way of providing information, but we are really coordinating with the developer because the developer will have the best sense of whether the project is moving, what the timeline is.
Okay, thank you so much.
Commissioner Cranston.
Yeah, that update notice was so tiny, I certainly didn't see it. So it's not unusual to see requests going to the ZA asking for extensions. So would that automatically trigger those notices?
Well, if a project does not need to go to council and it can be approved at ZA, then that would be the B date for in the left column, and then the timing around the notices would still be the same. It just needs to be scheduled in a way that meets those noticing timeframes, whether it goes to council for approval or it can be approved at a ZA. I don't know if that answered your question.
So the Avalon Bay project on corner Middlefield and Castro was approved. It's still not started, and they've asked for extending the development agreement, okay? So that 1 year from intent to develop to the date is fictitious. So how would somebody know that, and what procedure would there be for that kind of thing to get communicated?
Got it.
So people aren't moving ahead of time. I've seen a lot of things. When I say go into the ZA, it's can I extend my development agreement? Can I extend my development agreement? So it's been approved, but it's not a year. Yeah,
that's where the update notices would come in. And so that, I think it's in bigger font in the memo, but it is small there. If a project continues to be shifted, there would be continued update notices. Again, typically staff is in contact with a developer and tracking how things are moving. And as an extension is coming up, we would reach out, or the developer is reaching out. But there would be some coordination before the extended time period expires in order to determine whether there needs to be another extension. And so that's what would occur in any project if the time frame for the project continues to get delayed.
Second question. You include fire in the force majeure kind of things. What if the fire is caused by, improper electrical at the building? I didn't try to go through and read all your language. I get earthquake, that's pretty hard to argue with. Flood, that's pretty hard to argue with. Natural disaster, I get. Fire, that's different. So how are you incorporating what I call more the negligence kind of fires from the Sierras are burning every building kind of a fire?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a situation that has occurred pretty recently that is reflecting that, where there was a fire. And I think part of this is developing some criteria around being able to determine whether the landlord caused the situation, but basically the recommendation is if it would include fire. There's situations where maybe a tenant is knocking over a candle or something that causes the fire. So right now, what we're proposing is including the situations. We probably develop some criteria around being able to determine who is at fault or not at fault. And that's how we would envision, I think, implementing the program. But the fire is an example where there are situations where a landlord is not causing it. There could be examples where because of not upkeeping the building and there's a short or it causes a fire, then that may be attributable to not keeping the property maintained. So we don't get into that level of detail here, and we would develop some criteria around that.
Well, I would certainly suggest that if a fire is caused because a tenant started the fire themselves, they don't get any relocation benefits. Okay. They shouldn't be paid to move if they light their place on fire. And I'm sure the city attorney has language on force majeure out there that could be used in this kind of thing. The change in the special circumstances. So what that means is a single individual living in an apartment is going to get the exact same benefit as a couple with dependent children in what you're proposing here, if they're below 80%.
Yes. So yeah, you could have a household with school-age children, whether or not that household is, if they're above 80%, but they're in the 120% plus the 5,000 if they're in that category, they would get benefit plus special circumstance. You could also have a situation where you have a single individual who is 80%, but without school-age children, and they would also get the benefit plus the special circumstance benefit.
Did you consider any other options with more proportionality?
We did take a look at what some of the other cities do. Some other options could be, rather than including low income into the special circumstance definition, we could say, well, instead of 3 months of comparable rent under the TRAIL, which is what it currently is, maybe it's 4 months of comparable rent. That's another way to provide enhanced benefits for the 80% AMI group. Those were the options that really came about during the due diligence, is whether just providing more baseline requirements and not treating them as special circumstance, or including that group as special circumstance, which is the way that many other cities handle that situation.
And then you said at the very beginning that one of the goals was to try to encourage more people to stay. What in this accomplishes that?
Well, having a temporary displacement provision can help, so folks aren't unnecessarily moving out of the city in a renovation situation, for example. The other piece is just having some additional benefits. If you are a special circumstance and if you're low income, just having some additional benefit could assist. That doesn't address the fact that housing is just expensive here, but having more benefits and more resources to be able to move, to be able to have a higher dollar amount for the benefit could at least increase the likelihood, but doesn't necessarily guarantee it, but it would increase the likelihood, we believe, if it's a greater amount than what currently exists.
And then I don't know why it was originally put in Section 36, but certainly my view is that part of what the Planning Commission looks at on projects is the overall impact of a project on the community, the neighborhood, the people that are there. And so the relocation assistance program is part of that. Why is that not a component that we should be considering as part of evaluating projects? Land use is not just the dirt, it's the impact in the community, and this, it's not apparent to me how that gets addressed and how that connects back in by removing it from something that we take a look at.
Yeah, I believe the intention is not that EPC wouldn't have the ability to provide recommendations about the project. It's really just whether any future amendments need to go through and come to EPC for amendments. But as you are reviewing a project going forward, you would still be evaluating the whole project, which has the relocation components. It's really I think the amendment process that the EPC wouldn't need to be a part of, but you would still be evaluating a whole project that includes relocation benefits going forward.
I hear your answer.
All right, I have a few questions. I guess for Ms. Van Dersen, or Ms. Kennedy, I'm just curious. My understanding is that this did go before the RHC, and from all appearances, it appears that there was support for this. I'm wondering if possible, could you characterize briefly just kind of like the disposition of the RHC toward these amendments, kind of like the discussion and outcome?
I could provide a response. They were in unanimous support of the recommendations.
Thank you. When it comes to the alternative mitigation, that is also something that I was thinking about. Yeah, that 660 Mariposa project was very interesting as it was happening, and that was a very interesting circumstance available at that time, very specific. But nonetheless, one thing I am curious about, and I think you, Mr. Chen, mentioned the word equivalent. In that language, let's see, mitigation. I'm wondering, in the crafting of that, was there any explicit consideration or discussion when drafting for language that, to any extent or effect, required, or directed some equivalent value within the alternative mitigation? Because right now the way it reads to me is it seems like it says it may include these things, but it's not limited to these things, and then council gets to decide that. And it doesn't seem to me, I mean, as much as we love our current council today, I'm sure it just, I don't know that council's always in the best position always to know if an alternate mitigation works for the tenants. And so I'm curious to what extent was there any consideration around outreach to tenants as part of this process, getting their input on if the alternate mitigation meets their needs, some formal recommendation from staff as part of the process, whereby there's some formal guidance included on, hey, this is equivalent not just from a monetary perspective, but also from a functional perspective, right? Because there's a value in being able to either relocate physically or sustain tenancy for a period of time that's outside of just the raw 3-month plus $5,000 value. So then within that context, was it discussed explicitly to craft language in a way where equivalent value is explicitly called for, and with a formal process for staff to make that recommendation to council, if not also including tenant input as part of that process?
Thanks for that question. Alternative mitigation itself wasn't specifically identified as a focus area. However, if this is something that EPC feels that it would be a good recommendation to make to council, we would include that in the summary in the council report, and council could certainly direct staff to include certain provisions that aren't currently in the alternative mitigation section.
Sounds good. Thank you, Mr. Chen. I also, seems a little minor, but yeah, with the move into the chapter 46, I don't know if it's section, chapter, whatever we call it, number 46, is that red line where it says just housing, is that like the working title, or as part of the cleanup, just like, is that what staff is thinking, like housing? Or is it just a placeholder?
That's intended to be the actual modification, essentially housing-related ordinances, but just housing. Currently, Chapter 46 in its entirety is the mobile home rent stabilization ordinance. By calling it housing broadly, then the MHRSO would just be one article underneath that chapter.
Okay. Does staff feel that, to the extent it does matter, it might not matter? For all I know, we could call it Chapter 46, like ice cream, I don't know, and it wouldn't make an impact, but I'm wondering if there is some kind of like impact on alignment. Did staff consider like some like tenancy or tenant protect, like housing and tenancy, or something to that effect? Because it feels like a lot of this happens to align with renting households, if that makes sense, versus just broadly like housing.
Yeah, I think I'm following. What you're seeing here is with the MHRSO that, a protection program. With this one getting moved, that's another protection program. But we are envisioning other programs that are not specifically related to tenant protection programs, and that's why the intention is that this would be broader, because there will be future items that are not related to those items.
Okay. So is there no impact by expanding the scope a little bit, or not expanding the scope, like housing and tenancy or housing and renting or something like that?
Yeah, I think it would be a little bit more narrow, and having it broader will allow it to be the place for various housing related items.
Okay, sounds good. I also have a question relating to the right of return. It can always get confusing tracking between right of return, right of refusal. Wait, I guess I'm just curious, can you just speak to that a little bit more, like in a more streamlined manner? I'm particularly thinking of a couple scenarios. One being where a housing construction project, and maybe this is no longer the case under SB 330, but where there's like few rental units or few units that get delivered on site above what was already existing there. Maybe even we could imagine like 100%, right? Like for like, if that right of return would apply. And then also if you could just kind of like it, assuming that, we have one of the more, I guess, common construction or projects where you have maybe like a 20 unit building and now there's like an 80 unit building, just in that common scenario, if you know what I mean. The interplay between temporary relocation and whether or not there was some analysis done whereby it is deemed that the temporary relocation would enable the tenants to maintain residency in the area such that they could execute that right of return.
I think I'm tracking with what you're asking. Let me try to respond. So in the TREO amendments, the terms temporary displacement has a particular meaning, which is 90 days or less. In a redevelopment project, it's going to be permanent. So they're in the permanent bucket. Under Program 3.2, there are other items that ask staff to evaluate alternatives to displacement. Under that one, which we have not been able to really carve out the ability to work on those pieces, would be what happens in the interim in a redevelopment project where folks might need 2 years of time in order to make first right of refusal real. And so that's how we've termed it in the past, is making it real. And though that work item is a forthcoming one that we need to work on. Some of the ideas that have been floated have been, for example, could there be a partnership with existing landlords who have vacant units and they can house the displaced tenants in an alternative building? Actually, part of the permanent displacement provisions in the ordinance is to be able to relocate someone within another unit of the current project. For example, if only part of the building is getting demolished and there's two buildings and the second building is vacant, so there could be that option. Or if the landlord has another building somewhere else in the city, or if the landlord wants to partner with another landlord and find replacement housing. Those are all, I think, concepts of how do we deal with this interim situation. And so we'll work on that a little bit more, but some of that is contemplated in the draft amendments by finding replacement housing units rather than providing the benefits. And then a tenant could choose to live in this other unit on the interim basis and return, or they may just want to stay in that unit permanently.
Got it. Thank you. That does make sense then, because there is that distinction between temporary and then temporary. Yeah. With the comparable units, does that include amenities? I know there's like discussion around like the future of parking minimums and things of that nature that might shift this a little bit, but to the extent possible, does the comparable unit include access to amenities like common areas, like washing, parking, allotment, etc.?
Yeah, we have recommended creating a definition section that includes the term comparable. I'll just read it. A residential unit is comparable to the existing unit if it is located in the city, is reasonably comparable in size, number of bedrooms and bathrooms, contains similar accessibility features, proximity to services and institutions upon which the displaced tenant depends, and amenities, including the allowance of pets should the tenant have pets.
Okay. And is that because the future of parking minimums is like hazy, or is amenities typically inclusive of parking?
Yeah, I think the idea is that we would just leave it broad and then evaluate the project as it comes in. In the situation where there is a relocation to another CSFRA building, typically those buildings have existing parking, so the situations where there might be lower parking ratios are really in the new projects.
That is helpful. I know I had one last question. It might come back to me. Nope. Okay, that's fine. I might reprocess that. Yep. That table, we don't. If we need to go back to it, then we must. With the dates, this might sound like a paranoid scenario, but I've worked with tenants who, had reason to wonder if this is a scenario that was happening, whereby there is, like someone submits an application for redevelopment, people get spooked, people leave, and now I can, effectively clear out people and have that get raised up to market rate, and then withdraw. I guess that process, the new noticing process, how confident and why, in terms of speaking to this confidence level, but what's the confidence level from staff of this new process being able to address, a scenario such as that or mitigate that?
Overall, we think this is going to be an improvement to the trail because it first shifts developer required notices to a later date. Second, we are recommending a city informational notice, and the notion is that if the information comes from the city, that can help provide information and allow the tenants to know that it's coming from a source of information that they can trust. And then On the development application side, the recommendation is to include information that needs to be provided, such as the unit inventory, tenant information, and there are implications with the development project if they don't provide that information. So we think both from a noticing perspective, shifting it out, something from the city, plus a development application perspective, required information, impacts to your project if that is not provided in combination constitutes overall improvement to the efficacy of Treo and mitigating the situations where tenants are, for whatever reason, just leaving too early.
And is there some way, like if this was a scenario that played out, say that, there's a property owner that has multiple rental properties, and let's just assume we have like the one bad apple of landlords, where, this has been observed that they've done this once. Is there any kind of like way of either flagging or just having some situational awareness from the city's part, when applications for this property owner are submitted as an extra kind of like attentiveness, if that makes sense, or penalties of the kind that you've seen from other cities? Like, I'm just curious about that.
We don't, we're not proposing any type of sort of a like 3 strikes and you're out type thing, or that we would treat applicants differently. Staff is aware of the developers and aware of past projects. And so, we would have that awareness. We would evaluate each project in compliance with the requirements, and just ensuring each project is following the requirements.
All right, sounds good. Thank you very much. Any other questions from the commissioners? No? Okay, all right. Seeing no more questions, we will move this to public comment. If anyone in attendance would like to provide comments on this item, please fill out a yellow speaker card and provide it to the EPC clerk. If anyone on Zoom would like to provide a comment on this item, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Phone users can mute and unmute themselves with *6. Mr. Clerk, do we have any yellow cards submitted or any Zoom attendees with the raised hand in the queue?
We do not have anyone present in the room, nor do we have any attendees with their hands raised on Zoom.
Okay. Seeing no speakers then, we will now take it back to the commission for deliberation and action. Commissioner Yin.
Thank you. All the amendments seem to make sense to me. I think if council has the goal to try to ensure that tenants have the appropriate information before they make decisions, and to keep them in place as long as possible so that they can stay in the city, I think these move in that direction. So I'm going to be for it. I would just go ahead and make a friendly suggestion. I don't know if this costs money, so I don't know those implications, but the idea, when you do notice, to have either a phone number that they can call at any time, and you just let them know in the notice that this is the phone number to reach. We update it, I don't know if it's daily, weekly, by the end of whatever, by every Monday. At the end of every Monday, for the process ongoing, we will have our updates. I don't know. Or on the website, wherever it is. It's easy for the tenant to at any time, because you're juggling things, you're trying to make decisions quickly. You don't know if it's been updated. Do we have another 2 months? Do we have another month? Who knows? So that they can find out. And then also, every time you notice that the full schedule get put back out in the notice, so they know what to expect and when. I think that's probably key, is to have a better understanding of what's expected, even if it will change, and when it might change. So between those two, maybe there's just a little bit more comfort for the tenant to feel like they can get information easier.
All right. Commissioner Cranston.
So amendments 1 through 5, I get and seem positive. I am uncomfortable with the blanket change in Amendment 6. It seems that there should be some level of proportionality associated with it, and maybe it's also tied to Amendment 7. If somebody gets $20,000 to move to Tracy versus $20,000 to move to Sunnyvale, and they're in the Barry and they're close, I feel better about that. Okay, so maybe it's, you know, I'm messing with this here, but the 50-mile distance seems excessive to me, and maybe if one of the goals here was to encourage people to stay, I don't know that this, as it is right now, accomplishes that enough. And if there was a way to say, okay, if you're moving to someplace within 10 miles, because that's, I could say to Sunnyvale, Santa Clara, you know, Redwood City, okay, that's close, okay? 50 miles, that's Marin, okay? That's not here. That's not staying here. And so I guess, I don't know whether it's, the 50 miles seems excessive to me. Certainly Gilroy, I guess, may be 50 miles away. We got a big freaking county here. I don't know what the distance is. I didn't measure it, but certainly Tracy falls into that. And it seems like a long distance, and I'd like, at the very least, on the benefits, something that's reflective of the size of the household, rather than just a blanket. And maybe the 50 seems like a long way to me. So those are the two concerns I have of the individual amendments. I am personally unpersuaded about the recommendation to move this into Chapter 46. I'm not getting it. It's not persuasive to me. So that's kind of how I look at it. 1 through 5, thumbs up. 6. I feel there needs to be some kind of proportionality. I'd be more comfortable if the distance was different. And I'm not persuaded of the move to Chapter 46.
Commissioner Donahue.
So on the proportionality thing, it seems to me that not everything, but many things in here are tied to 3 months rent. And if you're renting you have a large family, you're renting a 3-bedroom versus renting a 1-bedroom, you're going to get more, the large family will end up getting more benefits just naturally from that. The relocation costs, you're moving a 3-bedroom apartment, so you're going to have more, it's going to cover the costs of the additional bedrooms and the additional people that are getting moved. So to me, that it does seem somewhat proportional. Not everything is proportional. One thing that's not proportional is this $5,000. That's very strange to me because it's not indexed to inflation, because it's kind of an arbitrary number. Some people who are on the border, and so we get them in with the 5,000, but now some people are on the border of that. So, I mean, where does it end? Raising it to 124% of AMI or something like that seems like it could be achieve kind of the same thing, and that would index that $5,000, assuming $5,000 is 4%. I just made that up. But and the 5,000 is actually not proportional because it doesn't say anything about the number of people, whereas AMI is actually dependent on the number of people in the household. Anyway, that's in the existing ordinance, I guess, so it's not, it's just kind of a weird thing to me. Generally I'm in favor of these things. I like that the initial notice, the city informational notice step comes from kind of a neutral party. And I think you mentioned something earlier about, the rumor mill and, people are like, oh, I hear they're going to tear this place down, and we better move, and we don't really know what's going on. I think it's rumors usually go bad places, and I think it's useful to kind of put correct information into people's hands, and then they can make informed decisions. So yeah, in general, I am in favor.
Commissioner Pham.
I had some thoughts. So definitely this is great work from staff. I know that's tough to balance protecting tenants, but also having policies that help us maintain our housing stock and promoting developers to redevelop and make improvements is also very important. So this is a nice balance. I had some thoughts about the amendments. In general, I'm in favor of a lot of them. I had a lot of the same thoughts as Bill Cranston regarding the 50 miles. Not suggesting really changing the 50 miles, but maybe there could be a different amount or threshold for moving costs if someone decides to stay in the city or in Mountain View. So adding like a higher number or a higher percentage or some sort of additional bonus for those who choose to stay in Mountain View might be something staff could consider. Also, I agree with staff moving the section out of Chapter 36. I get what you guys are trying to do with the other section and continuing code improvements in alignment with the council strategic plan. So I appreciate that. I guess that's all my main comments. In general, support of the amendments.
Thank you, Commissioner Pham. I'll speak to this. Yeah, I feel encouraged by this. I very strongly agree with Commissioner Yin around the need for some updatable, and accessible means for residents to be able to easily check on the status of their relevant potential displacement project, the status of that. There are things that I guess this is also kind of potentially a question before I go down this long commentary. Not too long. Right now, is there a requirement for landlords to, leave on tenant doors or call or notify, however they do it, with things like, hey, this is now going to ZA, or hey, this is going to DRC, this is the outcome of that, here's the next meeting. Is there any requirement like that?
I think there's a current requirement. Maybe I would ask Anki or Andrea whether that sort of information is being implemented just by practice. So maybe I'll turn it over to one of them.
Thank you. We currently have a very frequent contact between tenants and the consultant and staff of the Rent Stabilization Division. We reach out on a regular basis on the status of the project, but that's not currently codified in the trail.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, in terms of that friendly suggestion or amendment, I forgot how you phrased it, Commissioner Yin. I mean, I very strongly agree with that. I think if I could, have, way to recommend a city council that, the burden on this really ought to be as much as possible on the developer. As wonderful as our city website is, it's not a, your development project.mountainview.gov kind of easily to, access website with milestones, key dates, next steps, opportunities to engage, that level of transparency, whether on a website or, required to be taped onto someone's door. In my experience working with tenants, would go a very long way in helping people time a move, decide whether to move, or even know I don't have to move, or even just at a more foundational level, not live scared. And so I would very much strongly support some accessible information clearinghouse. I don't know how you might characterize that, Commissioner Yin. Personally, I'm fine with the 50 miles. If it's a standard that other cities are doing, then there's no reason that we should be more punitive. Along those lines, though, I also like the idea of a bonus of, whether it's encouraging or enabling, closer kind of level of relocation. I think that is helpful, to Commissioner Pham's point. And also, I think it kind of connects some of the dots on the reality that there's few housing units to go around in this area, and they tend to be more expensive than ones 40 miles out, 50 miles out. The other thing I would, in terms of, putting out for the commission in terms of, something that see if it gets support is in that alternate mitigation. Another kind of friendly just idea or recommendation is, to the extent that staff can take some just broad, feelers out and kind of try to craft some guided equivalency position on the alternative mitigation. So we just, so councils can be equipped and informed with, hey, yeah, this is equivalent in the monetary, not in the functional, or it's, however staff, would go off and do that. I think future councils would benefit very much, and tenants would benefit very much as well from the transparency of, hey, if this is going around the usual codified, kind of regulation or ordinance, it just would be very good for tenants to also be able to have the assurance and transparency that that they're not getting a shorter end of the stick as an outcome. So those are my commentaries. And Commissioner Cranston.
Just to follow up on your comments, I do like the idea of more noticing. I would not recommend that it's the landlord doing it, because my experience is I don't trust the landlord. So if the notices are coming from the city, that's great. I agree with you, put something on the door, but let's do it as part of those city notices, because I've seen landlords put language in things that sounds like it's not wrong, but it's misleading. And I think our goal here is to be more open and accurate in things. So I like that idea. And quite frankly, if the relocation costs are closer, it saves the landlord money than if they're moving 50 miles away. So maybe there's something there.
Okay, so I'm hearing support for some information, like noticing on the milestones, key dates, next steps, et cetera, as regard to project progress. I'm also hearing, it sounded like, if I'm interpreting Commissioner Cranston's comment correctly, some support for the idea of some bonus something for individuals who are able or choosing or demonstrating that they're relocating within Mountain View or close to it. Is that, am I hearing that? Are we able to make that recommendation? Staff, is that within our scope for this?
I think so.
And then Commissioner Ian, I'll go to in just a minute. And then the other component, is there support for the equivalency, kind of like incorporation in the alternate mitigation? For inclusion of language of that, yep.
Is this just providing clarity for what those alternatives might be? This is something that staff is already doing, it's just not codified as something they need to do, is it?
The goal here is to explicitly state that there must be some analysis of equivalency of the mitigation benefit. So basically, however staff would determine this, to make a clear analysis that is formally submitted as part of the process to council saying, we've assured this is an equivalent package and like in these X, Y, A, B, C ways, is what I'm saying.
If I could say it back, there's a section 46.2-3.10, which is the alternative mitigation, and it has language about an alternative to providing the required assistance. A landlord may propose a strategy that aligns with the goals and purposes of this article, but somewhere in that section to incorporate the concept of equivalent value or some such.
Yep, my hearing support for that. Commissioner Cranston supports. I support. Yeah, Commissioner Yin. Yep. Okay. Yep.
I had a question. So, would that be staff providing additional guidance and like writing out procedures about how they would evaluate alternative mitigations, and that's separate from any proposed additional changes to the code? Is that the approach we're going?
Just sort of thinking here, there's an analogy with our BMR program where there's alternative mitigation in the code, but we have guidelines to implement it, and that's where the more specific criteria lives. And I would recommend that if this were information passed to the council and council wanted to add it, that's how we would implement this provision.
Okay.
Any other comments, Commissioner Yin? Did you still have an additional comment, or you're in the queue? No.
Oh, I just wanted to clarify. So, I know there's concern about the 50 miles, and I think I'm with Commissioner Donahue, which is, if they have to pay rent closer and it's more expensive if they have to go out, then these people, then they have to commute, which is sucky. And if the intention is that they still get to, go to the schools here, moving out is not a great thing. So I feel like, sure, you get more money, gas money, or whatever. So I'm okay with the 50. You guys have evaluated, the other cities have the same thing. I'm not averse to that. I don't know about the bonus for staying in Mountain View, because Sunnyvale's right there. Palo Alto, we have a lot of that are close by. They can still be around. And I also want to ensure that, maybe they have to move to Tracy, but then they're going to have the first right of refusal. And they might take it up, so they might come back. So I don't think that necessarily moving a little farther out means they're not coming back. So I'm a little torn on that. I think if staff has already evaluated that this is the way to go, I don't want to parse it out so many levels that, you get bonus for that. We already have. I'm trying to simplify. And if we can keep it simple, and if staff feels comfortable with the way it is, then I'm comfortable saying okay to that. Not that it was a bad idea. I just don't want to get too much in the weeds with policy. Though I know I do it. For this particular one, I'm saying I don't want to get too much in the weeds.
I know I could go either way on that, Commissioner Donahue, fam. All right, let's do a quick straw poll. Who wants to keep the amendment to 50 miles as staff is proposing? Straw poll in 3, 2, 1. No. How am I voting? I'll agree to that. So I think that that gets majority support. Cool. It sounds like Commissioner Cranston's on the queue.
I'm okay with the 50, but I like the idea of if there was some incentive, if there's some additional value if they stay in Mountain View, that to me encourages them. The goal here is to get them to stay. That's to me the goal. Okay, if the range, if they move 50 and come back, that's cool. But if there's something that they can find someplace here and it makes it easier for them to stay, I think that's a good thing. So that's what I'm more interested in that than saying we're going to take the 50 miles out. Does that make sense?
I know I could go either way on this. I'm hearing Commissioner Yin saying, it'd be good to not overcomplicate matters. I am hearing Commissioner Pham and Commissioner Cranston trying to find a path toward helping sustain local residencies, even temporarily, which there's merit in. I guess, like Commissioner Yin, I know that you mentioned, we have like Sunnyvale, Palo Alto. Is your is your view, would it be more helpful to have like a radius, for example, like 10 mile, 25 miles, 50, some proportional view on that, or what are your thoughts?
I guess I assumed the 50 miles was the sort of radius that they were going for. I get, unless there's statistics that say people who, stay within 15 miles tend to stay, versus if you go out to 50, or beyond, they don't come back. Unless there's that, I'm open to it, though, but I mean, if it's not overcomplicating it for staff.
I guess I'm not suggesting that we put this in the code. As staff has already said, there are guidelines that are provided, okay? And if part of the guidelines say, hey, if you do something in the way you're proposing for your relocation package, you're doing something that encourages people to stay, we will view that more favorably than if you don't. So I'm not looking for that to be incorporated into the amendment. I'm looking for it to be, hey, staff, look at when you develop your guidelines, think about this. How do we make it more attractive for them to keep people here? That's what so I want to be clear. I'm not suggesting a change to the code.
So then it seems like that previous straw poll will be able to stand. And then Commissioner Cranston, is that just general like ideation for staff, or are you looking for?
Just like your feedback on incorporated into in the earlier item, that it gets incorporated and encouraged that it's being incorporated into the guidelines.
Yeah. Any discussion on that?
I just had a quick clarification. Is the incentive concept intended to be within the total moving cost of 50 miles, or is it on top of?
So support, I can support that.
The cost to move 50 miles away is going to be higher than the cost of moving a block away. So within the overall cost of relocation, there should be, it should actually save the developer money if they move the people a block away than if they move them 50 miles away. So in the total evaluation of the relocation costs, something that says, okay, they're not just going to pocket that. If they get people to stay, then that's a good thing, and that they should put that into the evaluation of the relocation packages. That's what
Meaning that because the developer might have been able to save some of the money from a farther move, they can give that difference to a household. Yeah, I think we'll have to evaluate that. There's one piece of information that might be helpful. These are benefits for the TRAO, but SB 330 benefits also exist in parallel. And when staff is evaluating the total benefit package, it is a comparison between the TRAO relocation amounts and SB 330 amounts. This was provided in more detail in the council memo, but in in perhaps the majority of the cases, the SB 330 benefits are likely to prevail, and they could be substantially higher than the TREO amount. So with the moving cost plus SB 330, that could be a much larger package. And it's really it's really the relocation benefits that would allow people to be able to stay in Mountain View. And I think we would probably have to do some analysis just to be able to better understand whether if there's some sort of conceptual cost savings from a shorter move, that there should be a requirement that they pass on the conceptual cost savings to a household that's moving closer. I think we probably just have to maybe analyze that a little bit more. It may be a little bit more complicated, and we probably have to just look at some other factors.
Yeah, Commissioner Young.
So you're recommending that just staff evaluate what can be done within this? Okay, I'm for that, so I'll change.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yep. Perfect. Sweet. Unanimous support on that. That works. So then, any other last minute commentary, questions? Yeah. Okay. Yep. So we basically have the recommendation from staff plus the recommendation for information noticing, like enhancements, and the alternate mitigation equivalency, and the differential monies of relocation cost. So that would be what's potentially up for action. Do we have a motion? Yep.
So none of those things, though, would amend the proposed code. I think they're all just, okay, got it.
They're all added guidance to staff to take to council. Yep. Ms. Pancholi, does that guidance require any differentiation in language from the script, or what would suffice for anyone wanting to craft a motion?
So maybe you can, when you're making the motion, we can say this is the recommendation as modified by the Planning Commission.
Okay, then I guess I'll make a motion since I have the since I have the paper. Anyone want to second my motion? All right, Commissioner Pham. Okay, sweet. So then the motion on the floor is that the Environmental Planning Commission recommend the City Council adopt an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Mountain View amending Chapter 36 zoning of the Mountain View City Code to update review procedures for private development applications with legislative amendments to zoning, general plan, and nope, this is not it.
Different item. That's the next agenda item.
Oh, wasn't stapled. That was my failing. This is all going. Everything's under control. Yep, perfect. Okay, sweet. Town relocation, perfect. The motion is, that the Environmental Planning Commission recommend the City Council adopt an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Mountain View amending Chapter 36 zoning of the Mountain View City Code to update review procedures for private, no, what? Oh my God, here it is.
Even though it says 5-2.
Yeah, it says. Okay, there we go. I'm reading from the script, guys. We're going off script. It is okay. Third time's the charm. The motion is to recommend that the City Council adopt an ordinance of the City of Mountain View repealing Chapter 36, Article 13 tenant relocation assistance of the Mountain View City Code, amending Chapter 46 of the Mountain View City Code to change the title and add a new article governing tenant relocation assistance, and finding that these code amendments are not subject to the California Environmental Quality Act. And the recommendations that have been supported by the commission for including enhanced noticing and for explicit statement of equivalency analysis as part of the alternate mitigation programs, as well as a potential payout of differential monies associated with relocation costs to tenants. Okay, cool. We will take this to a vote.
The motion passes with 5 yea and 2 absent.
Sounds good. Sweet. We'll move on to item 5.3. As you guys can tell, I do this all the time. So it's going well. Oh, yeah. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chen. Sweet. Okay, moving forward. We are now proceeding to item 5.3, request for amendments to Chapter 36 zoning of the City Code to implement Council Policy G9 regarding the gatekeeper process for legislative actions. We'll first have a staff presentation followed by questions from the EPC and public comment. At the conclusion of public comment, the Commission will deliberate and take further action. Let's begin with a staff presentation from Community Development Director Christian Murdoch.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Honorable Commissioners. I'm Community Development Director Christian Murdoch. I'm joined on the dais this evening by Assistant Community Development Director Amber Brzezinski for this item. We're here this evening to discuss City Code amendments to align with a City Council policy on gatekeeper applications adopted in June of this year. A gatekeeper application is a development project that requires a legislative amendment, such as a change to the city's general plan or zoning map or standards, because the project as proposed would not comply with the city's adopted regulations. The city's gatekeeper policy stems from 2001, when council determined a mechanism should exist to manage staff resources expended on processing applications that require legislative amendments. In June 2023, council placed an update to the gatekeeper policy on its 2-year priority work plan. Council held study sessions and other discussions of the policy in 2023 and 2024. Staff brought a draft gatekeeper policy to the Council Policy and Procedures Committee, or CPPC, for consideration in March 2025. And most recently, Council adopted Policy G9, establishing a new set of policies and procedures for processing gatekeeper applications in June of this year. The flow chart here helps to visualize the processes for the 2 types of gatekeeper applications. The streamlined gatekeeper application process allows an applicant to directly file a formal planning application and begin project processing. Staff will determine compliance with adopted criteria for streamlined gatekeeper applications at that time. No council authorization hearing is required. For standard or regular gatekeeper applications, an initial application must first be submitted to allow staff evaluation of consistency with adopted council criteria. Once that evaluation is completed, applications are brought forward to a council authorization hearing. At that time, council will determine whether to allow a project to file a formal planning application and begin processing. The gatekeeper policy includes 2 categories for streamlined gatekeeper projects. The first is for 100% affordable housing projects. This expanded the affordable housing project category beyond the previous limitation to projects seeking funding through the city's notice of availability, city's notice of funding availability, or NOFA process. The second category is for projects of limited size that provide substantial community benefits. This replaces the 2 previous categories for projects on sites up to 2 acres that involved either an industrial to residential conversion or a site with split zoning. For a project to qualify in this category, it must meet the eligibility criteria based on project type and location, and also meet the mandatory performance criteria. The project must then also choose at least one of the selective performance criteria related to affordable housing, parks, trails, and plazas, or community facilities. We'll now shift to discussing the regular gatekeeper application criteria. These criteria include 8 categories that a project can address to demonstrate high-quality project design, alignment with council policies and priorities, or provision of substantial community benefit. In general, the theme across these categories is to exceed any adopted city requirements. The policy provides examples of ways an applicant can incorporate characteristics from each category into a project. The first 3 categories are affordable housing, business retention and expansion, and parks and open space. The categories continue with community facilities, transportation, and trees and biodiversity. And lastly, there are categories for historic preservation and sustainability. Importantly, none of these categories are required for a regular gatekeeper project. An applicant can propose a project addressing many or all of these categories, or none at all, and still be able to move forward to a council authorization hearing. However, the policy encourages maximum alignment with the identified categories to increase the chances of favorable consideration by City Council. The policy also includes a number of administrative provisions that help formalize and standardize the city's gatekeeper process. These are intended to clarify how the city will process and consider gatekeeper applications. Of note, the policy includes a requirement for gatekeeper applicants to enter into a development agreement with the city to provide a mechanism to ensure provision of the community benefits offered by applicants during the gatekeeper process. Now that Council has established the substantive components of the gatekeeper policy, it's necessary to amend the City Code to remove conflicting provisions and also to make reference to City Council Policy G9, where it governs aspects of the gatekeeper process. City Code amendments to Chapter 36 zoning are necessary to achieve consistency with the gatekeeper policy. And because these are zoning provisions, an Environmental Planning Commission recommendation is necessary before City Council can consider an ordinance amending the City Code. Following the EPC's recommendation, City Council will hold a public hearing to consider the ordinance amending the City Code, and the City Council public hearing is tentatively scheduled for October 14th. Staff recommends that the EPC recommend City Council adoption of the draft ordinance included in the agenda packet based on the recommended motion provided on screen and in the agenda packet. Thank you very much.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Director Murdoch. Questions from the commission? Questions? Going once. Okay, Commissioner Pham.
I had a few questions. I read that there's a minimum waiting period 2 years for substantially similar applications that were not authorized to resubmit. Why 2 years, and how does it compare with other jurisdictions?
Thank you for the question. The 2-year period is intended to ensure applicants don't come in and intend to explore the minimum amount of community benefits or project components that they can propose and get through the gatekeeper process. The 2-year period is intended to encourage applicants to come with their best project proposal and to seek City Council authorization at that time, and to then require them to come back after that waiting period to then re-envision the project at a later date to ensure that, again, we're encouraging applicants to submit their best proposals. As far as comparing to other jurisdictions, that's not a criteria that we've benchmarked across other jurisdictions with gatekeeper or gatekeeper-like processes, so I don't have an answer to that specific question.
Okay. I just had a general question about percentage of projects that go through the gatekeeper process versus the streamlined process. Any sort of idea about the split?
It's difficult to speculate. There are trade-offs for projects that are looking to go through the new streamlined process, and it's hard to compare what might occur with that new streamlined process compared to the prior streamlined process, which had very different criteria. I can just compare to the number of regular gatekeeper applications versus streamlined applications over the last couple of years, and there were several streamlined applications versus just 2 regular applications submitted for the last year authorization in 2024.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Commissioner Donahue.
So policy G9 went through a big process and got adopted by the city council. What is the process for amending that policy, and how does that compare with the process that would have taken place with if everything were actually in the ordinance to start with, and we wanted to amend the ordinance?
So with council policy G9 being adopted by resolution, a resolution of the city council can amend that policy. And wherever it's referenced to govern a particular aspect of gatekeeper in the city code, that updated resolution and policy adopted with the resolution would govern those provisions. So a single action by council could adopt an updated policy. That contrasts with amendments to the city code, which are effectuated by ordinance, which require a recommendation from the Environmental Planning Commission and then a public hearing by the city council in order to enact those amended provisions. And that action by council actually requires two steps. There's the initial public hearing and then a second reading or adoption of the ordinance at a subsequent meeting. And so it's a much more intensive and time-consuming process to adopt city code amendments by ordinance as compared to this more streamlined process to adopt updated resolutions and policies that way.
Okay. The if the what was I going to say? Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Yin.
Okay, this might be a dumb question. I know in the housing element, it says that we have to review one a year, and it seems like common sense. If none come forward, you can't review the one, but just to clarify and confirm, if none come, that's okay.
You want me to? Yeah, so in the housing element, it actually just requires us to have one hearing a year. So in theory, if we don't get any applications, then we wouldn't have to have that hearing. And so, you know, we would just have to assess. And so now the way that the new kind of, you know, new model works with the policy, it's, you know, applications are just taken in just on a rolling basis. And they just have to come 90 days before the hearing, the authorization hearing. So they could come, you know, maybe 6 months before the hearing, but as long as they're in within that time frame. So when we get an application, then we'll start to kind of figure out when that authorization hearing should take place, and then, you know, just work accordingly towards that.
And I want to clarify, the obligation in the housing element is to hold at least one authorization hearing per year for residential or residential mixed-use projects. There's not an obligation to hold those hearings in the housing element for non-residential projects.
Okay. And do we have any?
So we haven't actually opened the gate, I guess you would say, because we were waiting for the ordinance modifications to go into place. So then that fully effectuates that new council policy that was adopted. So shortly after we finish, you know, this part of the process, then we will send out our e-notification to that group that subscribes to the gatekeeper page and put the information up on the website and open that gate, and we'll see what we get. But at this point, the only gatekeeper applications we have are 3 streamlined gatekeepers from the previous rules that are kind of working their way through right now.
I see. Okay. Thanks.
Oh, I had
Commissioner Pham.
Oh, thanks. I had a follow-up question based on Commissioner Donahue's questions. So if more of a clarification question. So if council wanted to pass a resolution to alter city council policy G9 in the future, would those proposed changes need to go through CPPC?
No, they would not be required to go through the Council Policy and Procedures Committee. It's possible the council could refer it and seek the input, but it's not a requirement.
Commissioner Donahue.
So kind of following on that, I remembered the question I was going to ask. You said that to amend the city ordinance, it would have to go through the EPC and council and second reading and all that stuff. Then you talked about G9 and you didn't mention the EPC. So would updates to that no longer need to go through the EPC?
Updates to Council Policy G9 would not require Environmental Planning Commission review and recommendation. Any change to city code provisions that pertain to the gatekeeper process would continue to require Environmental Planning Commission recommendation to City Council.
Okay, so this reduces our input. This action tonight would reduce our involvement in the process, basically.
It would change the role that the Environmental Planning Commission has in recommending gatekeeper-related policy.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner? No? Okay. My question, Commissioner Murdoch, could you characterize the change in the role of the EPC or other kind of like deliberative processes? Yeah, could you just characterize that, just kind of piggybacking off of Commissioner Donahue's? How would the role change or be reduced or et cetera?
If I could attempt to respond, I think to respond to your question, the role of EPC is not changing with this policy. The code amendments are coming to you for your recommendation because they're part of Chapter 36 of the City Code, the zoning code. So any further and future amendments to Chapter 36, including this provision, would come to you. But the gatekeeper policy itself, the City Council policy, is not something that would typically come to this body.
That sounds good. So then when it comes to projects that would be aligning to the business relocation, historic preservation, the correct categories in the table that we saw as part of the presentation, we would probably just, in terms of that evaluate, authorize part of the process, that would just go straight to the review stage, right? So we would still kind of like see or know about these projects, right? It just wouldn't be as like intensive. Is that fair to say?
Well, I think it's important to recognize the City Council maintained a role for the Environmental Planning Commission in the review of projects submitted that are authorized to submit. So the policy requires a study session at the Environmental Planning Commission for projects authorized to submit a formal planning application. So it's not as though the EPC will never have any interaction with gatekeeper projects that are submitted through the regular process. It's just that initial authorization decision is one that council directly undertakes.
Thank you. And I have no attachment because I won't be on the Planning Commission forever. But along those lines, though, I do have a question on the category component. Is it all, some, one? Like, for example, business retention, like if a developer does just one of those bullet points, say they provide lease subsidies, does that one criteria or meeting that one specific criteria get them through, or how would you characterize like the number of the like degree or extent of adherence to some of these categories that would warrant or enable a streamlined movement through the process?
So the business retention component that you described is part of the regular gatekeeper project criteria, and so that's not something that would be subject to the streamlining. With that sort of established, the number of criteria, including business retention or others, is not defined. An application can go forward with one, with all of them, with none of them. And that was a critical element of the City Council's deliberation of this policy. I think generally we've been accustomed to the gatekeeper process involving people coming with their A game and providing a lot of community benefits. But Council didn't want that to be a mandatory component, so that a project that maybe doesn't have deep economic ability to provide more traditional community benefits could still come forward and seek authorization if it had some other sort of inherent value for the community. that's not sort of a dollars and cents economic value, but had some sort of needed use or broader community benefit that's not recognized in that more traditional community benefit sense. And so that's why there's broad latitude for projects to come in with all, some, or none of those suggested categories.
Got it. Thank you. I appreciate that. No more questions for me. Commissioner Donahue.
Yeah, I guess I'm just on one topic tonight, but yeah, and I appreciate that. Yeah, we would still be involved in any amendments to Chapter 36, but there are large sections that are removed from Chapter 36, put into the policy, and now it just says see the policy. So we would no longer be involved in amending what was previously in those sections and what is now in that policy. That's kind of generally my question. I think the answer is yes, right?
That's correct. To the extent there's something that is no longer in the city code, there will no longer be a role for EPC recommendation to city council on such matters.
Okay, and that, fair enough, and that may be appropriate. I just want to be clear on that. Thank you.
Other questions? Thoughts, considerations? Nope. Okay. Seeing none from the commission, we will proceed to public comment. If anyone in attendance would like to provide comments on this item, please fill out a yellow speaker card and provide it to the EPC clerk. If anyone on Zoom would like to provide a comment on this item, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Phone users can mute and unmute themselves with *6. Mr. Clerk, do we have any yellow speaker cards in the queue or anyone on Zoom with a raised hand?
Yes, we have one speaker in person, Peter Katz. You may now come up and speak.
Yeah, I think it's me. Thank you, Vice Chair Nunez and members of the EPC. I'm Peter Katz, CEO of the Mountain View Chamber of Commerce. And for several years, we at the Chamber have been strong advocates for the return and revision of the gatekeeper process, especially with the need for more housing and meeting the requirements of the housing element. I want to thank staff for working with us on many of these changes that include things like removing the barriers, reducing the barriers so that we can actually do projects that are new, bold, exciting. Because let's face it, no one predicted what was going to be happening with COVID. No one predicted what was going to be happening in the last few years. No one predicted the shortage that we were going to have, and we need bold projects to take this forward. We also appreciate building in more versatility, a wider range of projects, reducing the number of requirements or saying all or none of the requirements when you can go through, because the whole objective here is to be creative, to be bold, and to be able to get in front of council to have your, for lack of a better term, your day in court. I do want to mention one thing, and that is we still do not see a reason to have a 2-year minimum for resubmittal. It slows the process and adds to the already significant costs. Let's face it, every time we have to go, a developer has to go back to the drawing board, if you will. That's hundreds of thousands of dollars, that's several months, et cetera. It just adds up very, very quickly for projects that are having difficulty penciling as it is. So if satisfactory changes are made, a project should be allowed to come back in at the next opportunity rather than waiting for 2 years, even especially since gatekeepers are only being performed once a year at this point. So I encourage you to consider that. But other than that, again, I just want to compliment the city staff on really taking into consideration very important elements. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Katz. Mr. Clerk, do you have any speakers remaining in person or on Zoom?
There are no more speakers in person or on Zoom.
Okay, seeing no more speakers, we will proceed to commission deliberation and action. Any comments from our commissioners? Mr. Cranston?
for those of you who are involved in the housing element, you probably recall my degree of cynicism about the fact that there was even a gate cure process that exists. So this I view as a major move forward, and I fully support the staff recommendation as is with no changes, because there really hasn't been a gatekeeper process for years, and we need this. So I'm all for it.
Thank you, Mr. Cranston. Any other thoughts from the commission? Commissioner Donahue?
So can I ask a quick question based on the public feedback? The 2 years, my iPad's having some problems. Is that in the policy?
It is, and so that's not really within the purview of the ordinance recommendation this evening.
Got it. Okay. Okay. And as far as comments go, I'm, a little concerned about, as you might have gathered, about kind of changing the process and kind of not, I'm not going to be on the EPC forever either. It's not like I'm power hungry or anything like that. But I do like having things vetted in a more holistic way with, lots of opportunities for public comment, things like that. But then to some extent, it does lead to burdensome, like if you can't be more nimble in adopting regulations, it just slows down the whole process. So I think all things being, considered, I generally support this.
Thank you, Commissioner Donahue. Any other commentaries? No, we don't have to. Well, okay. I support this as my comment. All right. It sounds like there's encouraging signs of support for this. Thank you for your question, Commissioner Donahue, clarifying the scope of the 2-year waiting period as pertains to G9 versus the zoning. Do we have a motion on the floor to move this forward? Commissioner Cranston has a motion on the floor. Any seconders? Commissioner Pham has seconded. Mr. Cranston, would you like to read the...
So I move that the Environmental Planning Commission recommend the City Council adopt an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Mountain View amending Chapter 36 zoning of the Mountain View City Code, update review procedures for private development applications with legislative amendments to zoning, general plan, and precise plans, and finding that amendments are exempt from review under California Environmental Quality Act to be read in title only, further reading waived, Exhibit 1 of the staff report.
Thank you, Commissioner. Seems like we can take this to vote.
The motion passes 5 yea and 2 absent.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. All right. We will now proceed to agenda item 6, Commission staff announcements, updates, requests, and committee reports. No action will be taken on questions raised by the Commission at this time. Any commentary, questions, updates, requests? Commissioner Cranston.
I don't know whether other commissioners would be in favor of this, but the comment on the speaker earlier today is not the first time we've had the question of new development not having locations for delivery vehicles on site. And I would personally like to see staff look at that and evaluate how might our codes be changed and standards be changed to address the fact that a large amount of activity around sites, particularly with less parking, are delivery vehicles, and we don't adequately account for that in our, I don't believe we adequately account for that in our current requirements. So I would like to see that, and if others would support that, then I would ask that staff look at that and come back to us with something and how that might be addressed.
If I may, I'll just mention that this issue has come up in the last two major planning processes that we've initiated as of late, the Downtown Precise Plan and the Moffett Boulevard Precise Plan updates. So those provide our first two opportunities to really think through this from a urban design and a regulatory standpoint. And so I think those will be the opportunities for staff to develop their thinking about ways to approach that challenge. And so when those items come back, that's probably the best time to explore that.
Commissioner Yin.
I appreciate that. I was going to just go ahead and reiterate the request because it has come up a couple of times. And, you know, I've been in the situation where there's just a truck in the middle of the road and everyone then has to like move around it and it's hard to even get out from behind. And if that happens time and time again along the same street, it's just, you know, defeating the purpose of the street. And it's something that, you know, we used to design for. And I had a question actually, and that is whether or not when you put it in the design of urban, you know, into the urban design, is that something that can just be waived or conceded later on?
Quite possibly, yes. I think that's the new reality that we operate within, which is that despite our best planning, many types of regulations can be waived or concessions sought from developers. I don't think that means we should not do our best planning and encourage people to design their projects and to behave in the appropriate manner. And so I think we're coming at it with that intention.
Sure, and in that case, then I would recommend definitely looking at the urban design in a way that makes it most natural to allow for that to happen so that it's a win-win situation for everyone involved. For example, I know I bring it up a lot. I love alleys. Alleys serve a purpose. They don't take up much room. And if that is already in the street grid or planned for, I think everyone will see that it's a win-win. It's a place to get all the deliveries, to put the garbage. It makes the front of the street that much nicer, adds to the walkability, the bikeability, all of it. No curb cuts, or not as many. So that is one example of a way to get it locked in so that it is not something that can be waived or conceded. It's just part of the street grid. It's not easy to do in a suburban development, as Mountain View mostly is. But if there's a way to get that in, I would recommend doing so. It helps a lot of the categories that we're trying to hit.
Thank you, Commissioner Yin. Any other announcements, updates, requests, committee reports?
I just thank you, Diana Pancholi, Principal Planner with the Planning Division. Just wanted to remind everybody we have the Celebration of Service Awards coming up on September 30th at 5:30 p.m. It's a Tuesday.
Thank you, Ms. Pancholi. Final. Commissioner Cranston would like to know the next meeting.
Next meeting, likely, not likely?
I'm going to double check that and circle back with the commission.
All right. We'll
But to the best of my knowledge, it is on track in October. Yes.
Yep. All right. We'll be excitedly checking our inbox. All right. We will proceed to adjournment. The meeting is adjourned at 9:20 p.m. Thank you, everyone.